recognize our industry leaders. An important purpose of our academy is to provide a network to link the past and the present in the construction industry. As such, we've established this NAC AMA to help transfer knowledge to our next generation of construction leaders. So welcome all. The format is simple. Our speaker, in this case, Steve, will be making a short presentation about his career. And at that point, we're going to ask questions from the participants. And if you've not already done so, please do email your questions to nacama@colorado.edu. At the end of the presentation, we're going to randomly draw a name for a $500 scholarship from someone who's present on the AMA here. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is Steve Halverson. Steve is chairman of the Haskell Company, one of the nation's largest integrated design-build organizations with operations throughout the United States, Latin America, and Asia. Steve also served as CEO for 19 years until 2018. Steve has served as national chairman for 3 industry associations, the Construction Industry Roundtable, the Design Build Institute of America, and the National Center for Construction Education and Research. He was elected into the National Academy of Construction and is a past chairman of AGC Colorado as well. Prior to entering the construction industry, Steve practiced law, specializing in representing clients in construction, architecture, engineering, and surety industries. On a personal note, when I was a student here at the University of Colorado, Steve was working in the area and would frequently come into the university and lecture and really helped inspire my career in the design and construction area, especially looking at design build. So Steve, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you and have you give a little bit of your background.
Well, thanks very much, Keith. I didn't know that I did figure, and I take that as a real responsibility, but you certainly make me look good by your accomplishments in your career, so thank you for those kind words. I'd like to be able to tell people here that my career was strategic, thoughtful, planful, and intentional, but none of that's true. It's, I think, a testament to opportunity and the blessings that this country offers really everybody. And I was able to stumble into an awfully rewarding career somewhat by accident. I welcome everybody here to Haskell's headquarters. We're here in Jacksonville, Florida. You can see the river behind us, but our business is all over the country, and you can probably tell from my accent that I'm not from Florida, something that's viewed as a detriment to people here. I grew up in Minnesota, from pretty modest background, poor, actually really poor. And so I didn't really have a very clear mental picture of careers and career planning, or even what college was about. I was a first-generation college student. My parents hadn't gone to college, so I didn't really know what to do. So I went to a high school guidance counselor and talked to him a little bit, and he gave me a test that I remember was called the Cooter Preference Exam. Don't know if they still use it or not, but they asked a lot of really odd questions. And it's designed to get out what you might have aptitude for and what you might be interested in. So something you'd be good at and would enjoy doing. And the test was scored on a 100-point scale, but it was possible in extreme cases to go off either the high end or the low end. So I took the test and was evaluated. I scored 113 in a category called law and politics. Sounded about right, I guess. And at the other end, I had a -17 in a field called construction. And the examiner said he'd never seen a score that low ever. And I attribute that to I'd spent the summer working construction. I got hit in the head by a 2x6 and had stitches, and that probably colored my opinions at that time. So it's more than slightly ironic that I'm here with you today talking after spending most of my adult life in construction. But before that, I did go to college, and I majored in political science, as the exam said I might, and I went to law school. and had every intention of practicing law, and had no intention of being in construction or anything like it. But a few really interesting things happened along the way. When I was in law school, I didn't have any money, so I had to work. And I got a job working on a program that was funded by the Justice Department. And it was about procurement, about how state and local governments spent money. And one of the things they spent money on the most was big capital projects. And it was an area of concern about how those contracts got formed. There was concern about fraud and everything else that was present at the time. This goes back in the 1970s. So I got to know a lot of people in the industry, heads of the American Institute of Architects, heads of engineering, ASC, and other engineering associations, the Associated General Contractors, and others. And I found I was really fascinated by those people and what they did. It seemed more tangible, more real. They were doing things that wasn't abstract, which law school is, and it wasn't just paper pushing. It was much more tangible than that. And so despite what that exam said back in high school, I formed a real interest in it, and I didn't think much more of it than that. But when I finished law school, I went to work for a law firm that specialized in representing contractors and architects and engineers. And for those that have heard Mike Loulakis, who preceded me on this Ask Me Anything program, Mike and I were partners, we're associates actually together. We both started our careers at the same law firm. Mike, by the way, is one of the most thoughtful, intelligent, formidable people I know in this industry or any other. He's a dear friend and remains so to this day, but we worked together. Mike was an engineer, so he had that up on me. I didn't, and so I had to learn things as they came up. But what I learned in that is how much I enjoyed the construction and engineering side of the business. So after practicing law for a number of years, I had a particular case that time doesn't allow to go into the details. I was working for a very large publicly traded company. It was a products liability case. And I was giving a description to the CEO and the board about how we're going to handle this. And he said, no, it's not what we're going to do. I said, you described a good legal strategy, but I'm responsible for the company's culture, for the integrity of what our engineers do, and everything else. So we're going to do things my way. And the way he described that to me was so impactful that I realized that in practicing law, I was very good at a very narrow thing, but I wasn't very knowledgeable about anything else. And listening to my client, the CEO of this big company, talk, I just blurted out, I said, I want to think more like you do. And so he said, then why are you practicing law? And I didn't have an answer to that question, but it rattled around in my head. And at the time, M.A. Mortensen Company, a large builder based in Minneapolis, but operations around the world, was a client. And Mortensen, Mr. Mortensen to me, offered me a job and said, you don't have any background in this industry, but we'll take time to teach it to you. And if you prove yourself, we'll give you a chance to move in the operations side of the business and not just be in the law department and practice law. So I jumped at it. I didn't have a solitary thing to offer that company other than legal skills, I suppose, but they were patient and persevering and tried to teach me at least the basics as much as you could learn without a good educational background. And in a few years, they did give me a chance to move out to Colorado, and that's where you and I met, Keith, and I was managing their Western operations, and I loved every second of it. And I realized my unintentional career path that took me into construction took me into something that meant a lot to me. And when I say construction, that for me is shorthand for architecture, engineering, and construction. It's a singular system, which is why I'm here at the Haskell Company now. And I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with how real it was. I fell in love with how the people were, that they were honest and they They worked hard for a living, and they had something to show for it at the end of the day. And this will be a theme through our conversation here tonight. But I also fell in love with how much the professions together were trustworthy and were trusting, which those aren't words you use in the law practice a lot. And a lot of what lawyers do is built around distrust and how to manage that. But the industry, this industry, is built around trust. And I'll talk more about that if the questions take me that direction. And that meant a lot to me, more now than I realized at the time. But when I thought about the complexity of the transactions, and when I was a lawyer, I was attracted to it because this is so complicated. Things are always going to go wrong. There'll always be work for lawyers here. And that was a cynical thought process, but it was true. But later, I saw that complexity as an opportunity and not as a liability or a problem, but rather as something that could be used to advantage, used to business advantage, if you started with a foundation of trust and built on that, which I think is particular to this industry. It's a trusted industry, and I'll defend that thesis if people want to disagree with me. And that trust comes, it's been hard earned. So that's how I got here. I had the chance to lead the Haskell Company 19 years ago. I had known Preston Haskell, the founder, through our mutual association, the Design Build Institute of America. And when he offered me the chance to lead the company he founded, and he founded it from the beginning as an integrated architecture, engineering, and construction business. As much as I love Mortenson today and loved it then, and it was a fantastic experience, the chance to lead this company was, to me, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I jumped at it, moved from then living in Los Angeles over to Florida, and we've been lucky to grow the business. We're now about $1 billion in revenues and 23 offices or 22 offices around the country and around the world. And it's been a fantastic career. But when I think back on why it's been a fantastic career, I keep coming back to trust. So I hope you ask me some questions that take me in that direction. But so that's the short story. I'm sticking with it, and I'm happy to entertain any questions about anything at all.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. I really, really appreciate the overview and giving us your perspective. We do have 75 questions already. We won't be able to get through them all, but I'm going to start with a question from Aaron here. Aaron asked, based on your experience, what's the most important skill or quality for a project manager to keep effective and constructive communication going throughout the project?
Well, I've already betrayed my sense about the importance of trust, but I think the question is maybe a bit more specific, so let me try to be more specific. And it's a really good question. But as I think about project management in particular, and that's what Aaron's question is aimed at, I give our project managers a couple pieces of specific advice that I think get to this point. First of all, questions are way more important than answers. And there's a tendency when you have a title like project manager, you are in charge and you have big responsibilities and you think you need to have answers. What you really need to have, though, are great questions. Questions are more important than answers. And it's not just, and it's questions of everybody, your client, what their expectations really are versus what you might think they are, your subcontractors, your design partners. Everybody there has a point of view, has a set of interests. And your job as a project manager is less about telling them what to do than it is at understanding what success looks like from the standpoint not just of your own firm, but every other stakeholder in that project. The best project managers seem to get that intuitively. They just know. And I watch them work, and I'm filled with awe at how thoughtful and smart they are at getting around understanding through questions. But everybody needs to be successful in the project. The second piece of advice I give is and this will sound like a lawyer, but it's about vocabulary. And when I'm in meetings and I watch project manager say something like, well, our position is X, describes what that is. That conversation never ends well, because what it invites is somebody else say, well, my position is Y. And now you have two positions and you're no further along in solving whatever the problem is or the issue of the day is. So instead of talking about positions, I suggested, or talk about interests. What's your interest? And that's a little different conversation. If you're the builder, you'll say, well, I have an interest in finishing this project on time. I can't afford to be late. We can't afford to be late. We budgeted a certain amount of time and needs to be on time. We need to be safe. That's important. My company tells me so, and I owe that obligation. We need to have quality. So you can't afford to have rework coming back here and upset clients and all that. And when you talk about your interests, what that provokes in the other side almost always is, well, those are my interests too. They may have a little different emphasis, but what you realize and you get to right away is you have a lot more in common with the other parties than you have apart. Stating positions doesn't help you much. Talking about interest does, and it starts pulling people together almost instinctively and say, we have a common goal, mostly common goals. There's some that are different, and there's certainly different priorities. But a successful project builds on the commonality of interests that all the parties have. And a project manager, the best project managers, figure that out, and they get to that point and get out of the chess beating and trying to prove that they're smarter than the other person. You get down to what really matters, and that's what are people's interests. What does success look like for each and every person at the table?
Outstanding. I think that's a really exceptional answer to the question. Henry has another question, really from the role of or from the position of a student here. What's the best way to differentiate yourself when applying for jobs after graduation?
Boy, I'm so glad that question came up, because I thought it might. I started thinking about that, and I'd like to say we're in recruiting season, but it's always recruiting season here. And I think that's true for most big employers. And the question's really smart because it assumes a really important truth, and that's that what got you the interview won't get you the job. Let me explain what I mean by that. First of all, everybody here, if you're taking time out to be on a call like this, at whatever hour it is, wherever you're at, I know a couple things about you. First, you're an engaged student. You're going above and beyond the call to educate yourself. And I know the programs that you're from, so you're getting a good education. That's why you got the interview. You're smart, and you're plenty smart to work for this company or anyone just like it. So that's not what either gets people jobs or allows them to succeed or causes them to fail. It's other things. So when you walk into a job interview, you've already passed the first screen. Everybody there has already determined you're smart enough for this job. Don't spend your time trying to reprove a point that you've already made. Most employers, and everybody has a different approach, but most employers are trying to answer 4 basic questions. First of all, can this person communicate? It doesn't do a lot of good to be really smart if you can't convey your smarts to other people in a project setting or any other setting. So if you can't speak or write well, it's not going to mean that much that you had a 4.0 in civil engineering. So they're looking for communication skills. So distinguish yourself in whatever writing, make sure it's perfect, not good, but perfect, and that you have practiced enough in speaking so you feel comfortable, confident, and calm when people are asking you questions that you may or may not have anticipated. That's question 1. Question 2, they're trying to decide is, are you just a fun person to be around? Are the other employees of this company going to enjoy working with you or not? I know it sounds basic, but it's largely a chemistry test. All industries, but this one in particular, requires people to work in teams. No one person knows everything or even a fraction of everything. So everything important happens in teams, both internal teams and externally. So the second big question you need to distinguish yourself on is, I'm a good person to work with. I'm collaborative, I'm kind, I'm thoughtful, I'm not a jerk, and I conduct myself in a way that other people will enjoy being around me. So that's question 2. The third question you distinguish yourself on, if I'm your supervisor, well, I like working with you. Are you going to be a problem solver or a problem creator? Sometimes are you the headache or are you the aspirin? And people fall into different categories, and you try to figure out in an interview, is this a person that's always talking about what they expect, what they want, and all the issues, or are they naturally kind of, you know, every job has problems, and I'm going to do my best to solve your problems and contribute to solving them, and be somebody who's solution-oriented, not problem-oriented, and you try to figure that out. And the fourth question you're trying to answer, and it's the most important one, does this person's values generally align with our company values? And if you're getting ready for a job interview, I can't encourage you strongly enough to spend time to understand what the company's values are. And the good news is most companies make it really easy. If you go on their website, they'll probably articulate what their core values are, and they'll give some description of what that means. But don't just stop there. See if you can't get copies of internal employee communication. See what they write about. What stories do they tell to each other about what matters? And you'll very quickly and easily figure out what the values that company holds. And there's no one right set of values and things. Everybody's got their own. We have ours, and other companies do too. They'll sound sort of similar, but if you can really tap into and really understand at a little deeper level what those values are and express yourself meaningfully to those in a way that shows that your personal values are aligned, they're similar, that's going to catch everybody's attention. And my ears are wide open when I hear somebody talking about values. And if they spent the time to discern whether their values match our company values, I know we've got a winner. Somebody who's thinking about the right things, who's mature enough to understand what those things are, and cares enough to spend the time to do that kind of due diligence. So those are the 4 questions I would encourage people to try to answer. Just doing that, you will be distinctive in the interview. You won't be repeating stuff that people already know from your resume or talking about you're the captain of this. Now you're talking about things that actually matter in the workplace. So that's my best possible advice about how to go get a job once you've got this very valuable degree that you're all working on.
That's really outstanding set of questions and thoughts there. Thank you very much, Steve. Here's a question asking you to do a little reflection. Here, James is asking if you could change one thing about how you've managed projects in the past, what would that be and why?
Let me try to, this will sound like a word, let me try to reframe that question a little bit so I can give you a better answer, because I do want to draw it back to trust. As I look back over my career at the things that were most successful and things that were least successful, the correlation is almost perfect with how well I worked to establish and manage on a foundation built on trust. Let me try to, and that's easy to say, it's harder to do. Let me try to explain that, maybe give a story if you'll permit me on that. For those that heard Mike Loulakis, you listened to somebody who I think there's probably not 5 people in the world that know more about contract formation than Mike Loulakis, about taking these complex transactions and writing down responsibilities, allocating risk, anticipating how issues get resolved, whether it's schedule or cost or anything else. Mike's as good as there is. And those contracts are really, really important. But here's the thing, it's not enough. The best contract, drafted as intelligently as only a Mike Loulakis could, is important and indispensable, but it's insufficient for success. What's needed is an architecture of trust around the project that needs to be systematic, needs to be comprehensive, and it needs to be personal. And Keith, share a story that illustrates the point, one you'll be familiar with because it's in Colorado. But around the time you and I were first getting acquainted, I was responsible for building Coors Field, the home of Colorado Rockies. It was a new franchise in town, and it's a big deal, if you remember. It's a $174 million contract, which is real money back in 1994. And it was much competed for. We wanted that project so badly. And so when we won, I was really excited. And I get a call from Ray Baker, who was a very prominent businessman, and he was chairman of the baseball stadium district. He's my client. And he said, why don't you come to my office right now? And I thought, oh boy, here it comes. It's the cram down. It's what's the last concession he's going to get? What do I have to cut my price? And I was getting myself mentally prepared for this kind of a conversation. So I get to Ray's office, sit down, and the little table he has there, and he's got one file, and it's red. I remember it's a manila folder sitting in the middle table, and that's it. No contract, no anything. I thought, well, this is odd. And he said, Steve, let's start off by acknowledging something. He said, somewhere in the course of this project, you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to mess some things up. And so will I as the owner. He said, can we agree on that? And I said, yeah, that's certain. I thought it was a really odd way to start a conversation. He said, here's the deal I want to propose to you. He said, whenever you make a mistake and have a problem, I will have your back. If every time I make a mistake and we have a problem, you have mine. He said, I require only a few things. One is, I never want to be surprised. If you have any bad news at all, I want you to run, not walk, to tell me about it, no matter what it is, even before you know how you're going to solve it. I just want to know. And second, he said, you see that file folder? I said, yeah. And it had a title on it. It said owner, contractor, correspondence. He said, what's in that file? And I said, nothing. He said, let's keep it that way. I said, I know we've got contracts, and you've got notice provisions and all that stuff you got to comply with. But let's not get into letter writing. If there's any conversation we need to have, let's talk. By telephone, if it's important, let's do it in person. And we're going to manage this project that way. And there's going to be all kinds of issues that we can't predict, but that's how we're going to get through this. And I was really taken aback by that. I didn't ask for anything else, didn't ask for a price cut or any of the things I thought. So about 2 months later, we had a chance to put that to the test. The stadium district was busy acquiring all the property on which we were going to construct. And they had acquired all of it except for about a 2-acre parcel in this whole site. Problem was, the 2-acre parcel in the middle of it was where home plate was supposed to go. Now, a couple of things about baseball parks is everything's built on a radius, first base, third base line. You start behind home plate, because that's where the most complex work is, and the trades. So you get off to a good start, you sequence it very carefully, you fan out first base, third base, come together in center field, and you're done. That's oversimplified, but that's the sequence. The other thing you need to know is there are no time extensions in these contracts. It doesn't matter what the contract says. Major League Baseball sets their schedules years in advance, and they don't really care if you've had a problem getting it built. You get it done on time. So the only thing you know for sure is the completion date, no matter what else happens. So we had a problem. The stadium district did not own home plate, right where we needed to start. The media picks up on this, and they whip it into a frenzy to looking for controversy. And our team said, boy, this is bad news. This throws our schedule. And you better write a letter. You better let them know so our rights are protected. And I remembered our conversation. And so we'll give notice to all these things, but not writing a letter. It said, how are we going to solve this problem and not extend the contract date? So we had a fantastic team of people. And so they started working on it. And they came up and said, we're going to build it backwards. So we're going to start in center field. And we're going to come around, we're going to meet at home plate. And that will buy the district another 3 or 4 months to get the property. And that's how much time they needed to get through it. And it's going to be really hard, Steve. They said it's because all the congestion is going to come in the last part of the project. The trades are going to be overlapping. Somebody's going to be behind schedule. It's going to be a problem. And I said, okay. So I went and I saw Ray in person, and I said, here's what we plan to do. We're going to build it backwards, but when we do, we're going to have problems. Something's going to be wrong. Some contractors will be behind schedule or something. And the other thing is we're making it really hard for our designer because they had a lot more work to do, and they were planning to do it in a logical sequence, and we're telling them to do it in an illogical sequence. So they had a problem. So, but we did. And the media said, well, what are you going to do? And we just said, we're fine. We're going to get this done just like we said. And all the other stuff was among the parties. So Ray promised his help, turned to the architect, which is HOK. They're based in Kansas City. And we were putting huge demands on them. We cleaned out my office, my physical office, and others, turned into a design studio so they could move their designers to Denver, 2 blocks from the stadium, so they could work around the clock to produce drawings in a illogical and unplanned sequence, and everything came together. And that project, I won't get into more details, but everybody did exactly what they said. We didn't write letters. We trusted each other. And my point is that nothing in that very well-constructed contract would have helped us get through that. Nothing. The only thing that got us through that was because we built a bond of trust, and we managed that. We managed that way, and it wasn't just Ray and me. That was the starting point, but we extended the whole team. We built a culture of trust that everybody looked out for everybody else, and that's why the project was a success. And it was a lifelong lesson for me when I realized that as a lawyer, I put a lot of faith in contracts and all that, and I realized it just isn't enough. If you don't have that, especially on big, complicated projects, you don't have enough to succeed. And every time I remember that, we do well. I've done well. And every time I forget that, problems have arisen. So if there's a single trait, if there's a single thing that I would do differently, is I would be even more intentional, more thoughtful, more comprehensive at building a foundation and an architecture of trust around every single project that I was responsible for. Sorry for the really long answer, but it was an important point to convey.
No, I very much enjoyed the answer, especially watching the construction of the stadium and still being one who enjoys it. I do remember the stories in the papers and watching it being built. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Kind of going along these lines here, Anna has a question about your approach to building and managing teams. I think she'd really just like to know if you have any philosophy or approach to building and managing teams. I think that's really
building and managing what?
Teams. Yeah, so building and managing
teams.
Yeah, especially from your perspective as a design builder, where you're bringing teams of very different specializations together on a single team.
Got it. It's a great question, and it gets at a fundamental truth in the industry, and that's that the only thing important ever happens through teams. Sometimes they're big teams, sometimes they're small teams, sometimes they're enormous teams, and they're really independent companies on their own. But what they have in common is a sense of building teams, and I do have philosophies about that. I think it gets back to, or ties back the question about job interviews and that. Here at Haskell, and for that matter at Mortensen as well, I've had the chance to hire and unfortunately fire lots and lots of people, hundreds. I can't think of a single time, there probably has been, but I can't think of a single time where somebody failed because they lacked technical skills. They always were smart enough and able to do the job. If they failed, they lack interpersonal skills. So when we build teams, we spend a great deal of time assessing how people will work together, what their individual strengths might be, how they might be self-aware of what they're not good at, and making sure the team is what's important. It's not important about the individual. It's whether the team is high performing. And people can have different niches or skill sets, and how you put that together and making sure you're clear-eyed about it. And it's not just drafting an all-star squad. It's not taking the 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 best people. It's getting the 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 right people for the job. And to be successful, that requires open-mindedness, requires a respect for diversity, and I mean that in the traditional sense of gender and race, but in the more general sense about just diversity of thought, diversity of problem-solving skills, of life background. If you don't really respect that, you'll have a tendency to build a team that looks a lot like you, and that's not a team at all. That's just a bigger version of a single person. So we spend a great deal of time on constructing teams, and it's not just at a project level. I just stepped down in August as CEO, and we have the leadership. My title is CEO, but we called it the Office of Chief Executive, or OCE, and we called it that way for a reason. It was a team. It was me, it was our Chief Operating Officer, our Chief Financial Officer, and our Chief Human Resources Officer. And those were job titles, but more important was what we were, and that was a leadership team. And we wanted to demonstrate the company. That's not just how you ran projects, it's how you run companies. And the key to it is understanding people's strengths and shortcomings, and more importantly, that they understand what they have, and building an atmosphere so that it's okay not to know everything. And it's okay to turn to somebody else in your team and say, you're better at this than me. What do you think? And go with that person's decision, their recommendation, their thoughts, even if you don't really necessarily agree with it. And when you have that kind of a high trust environment, magic happens. And I see it here in our Haskell's business is vertically integrated. So we generally work, the teams are internally constructed. So we've got hundreds of architects, hundreds of engineers, hundreds of builders, and we pick and choose people for it. It doesn't make the problems different than if it's separate companies, just that we all work for the same company. But when we're honest about teams, it's making sure that we recognize and the individuals recognize not just what they're good at, but what they're not so good at, and having an honest conversation about it. When you do that, teams cohere, they look out for each other, they have each other's back, sort of like my conversation with Ray Baker, and they become high-performing units of business, and magic happens. But it only happens when that team has mutual respect, and it doesn't matter what discipline it is. You have to have respect for the people, not just the discipline they represent.
Wonderful perspective. And when you think about it, that things don't happen unless they happen in teams. It really does give you that perspective. Excellent. Couple questions that might take you in a little bit different direction here, but I think they're really relevant to our the folks who are dialed in today. One is about sustainability. Peter's asking, has your view on sustainability changed since the beginning of your career? And if so, what's motivated the change?
Peter, great question. It's more than changed, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but it went early in my career. It wasn't even a thought, and now it's a dominating thought. I started in this career in the early 1980s. If the word sustainability was coined, I don't remember it. The Environmental Protection Agency at that point was only about 8 years old itself. It was the creation of the Nixon administration, and the main was building water and wastewater plants, and having some air quality standards for cities like Los Angeles, which you couldn't see 3 blocks because of smog. So it wasn't really about sustainability. It just wasn't really in the vocabulary. Today, as we think about this, as I think about our business, becomes a moral responsibility. You know, there's hardly any industry that more directly and tangibly affects the world than our industry. Every single thing we do alters the planet, everything. You put a building up, infrastructure, you dig a hole, whatever it is, you have changed the world permanently by what you're doing. So we think about it, and I think most companies in the industry now accept this not just as a thing, not just as an adjunct, not just as additional knowledge to have, but as a moral responsibility that comes with the territory of people that choose this industry and this profession for their careers. I think about it that way. And if I didn't, I would have been fired. And I would have been fired by our young people, because I have learned, and I give a lot of credit to this generation that's on this call and the ones that just preceded them, because they demand it. They won't work for a company that they perceive to be insincere and doesn't back up the notions of sustainability and this moral obligation with tangible, real, and practical action. And I think if there's education is not a one-way street from old people to young. You mentioned passing down received wisdom, but it's also keeping your ears open and realizing that younger people have a lot to teach older people. And the great gift that the more current generation or generations have given our world and given people like me is an appreciation for the importance of sustainability, environmentalism, the ecology, climate change, things that I spent most of my adult life growing up not paying any attention to. So it's decisive for our company. We pay attention to rankings in Engineering News Record. The one we're proudest of is being the number one so-called green industrial, both designer and builder in multiple years. And our people take a lot of pride in that because they realize it's not just what we're doing, but how we're doing that matters and gives meaning to their lives. So yeah, it's a big deal. And it's not just a big deal to me, it's a big deal to everybody here. It is to our industry. And especially if you think about it as a moral commitment we have to the rest of society by virtue of what we've chosen to do.
Great. Thank you, Steve. It's good to know that the students can find companies who share those types of values. It really is important. A question, this one might be difficult, but I'm going to challenge you with it. Have you ever been given a task from a supervisor or manager that you deemed unethical? So someone asked you to do something either socially, economically, or environmentally unethical. And if so, how did you handle the situation? And that question was from Aaron.
Great question. I think I've answered a couple of parts. First of all, I am extraordinarily blessed and lucky that I can't recall a single time that that's ever happened to me personally. And I attribute that to great good fortune of every employer I've had have been good people and good firms. And that's part luck, partly by design. And I really, getting back to the jobs question, for God's sakes, as you're looking at employers and you're interviewing, it's a two-way street. You need to be interviewing them. And are they the kind of company that you want to entrust your soul to? And it sounds dramatic, but I don't think it's over dramatic. You're lending your future integrity and reputation to another company just by working there. You can't let that be abused. You have to work for a company that is aligned around the same values you hold as a person, or you will find yourself in that situation. So that wasn't very helpful. So let me point out a point when our people were confronted with an ethical issue like that and what we did about it. This came in the context of our international operations. And it was the worst kind of thing because it was a government agency of another country that was approaching our team with a practice that in our world is clearly unethical in that particular country. And I'm being vague for a purpose, not to disparage anybody, but that particular country was ambiguous. People were dealt the same thing all the time and they had solutions to it, but they had solutions to it that didn't conform to our company's sense of values, or most American companies' sense of values. So you had a chance to watch, I had a chance to watch how our people reacted to a really hard situation where they had a tough issue. And it wasn't small. It was into the millions of dollars that was being sought. And so you had a chance to see the character of the people that work here. And what do? they probably, well, maybe could have solved that problem without me knowing how, and it would have been wrong. I hope we had the controls to catch it, but truthfully, they probably could have concealed that. What was enormously gratifying to me was they didn't. They recognized this for what it was, something that may have been semi-acceptable practice where they were, but it didn't fit our company values. They did the right thing. They elevated it. They said, this needs attention at the highest level. So they called the person running that part of the operation, who in turn called the chief operating officer, who in turn called me. We were on a collective call together that day. And I felt so strongly about the need to not just make the right decision, but to support our people who are putting themselves out there, that I got a flight the next day to the city. And I met with the U.S. ambassador that day, said it was emergency. And I said, this is what's going on, and we need your help. This doesn't pass. We are going to take this on. And it's clearly not a very good economic decision. But our people stood up for the right things, and we're going to back them all the way. But we need our government's help, which was forthcoming, I will say. I was grateful for that. But the lesson for me was how easy it is for your employees to be faced with really difficult situations. And ethics are rarely a matter of black and white. They tend to be some version of gray. It's not that simple. It's usually things that you can kind of make a case for. Everybody knows you don't lie, cheat, steal, or kill. That it's the nuances is where these things tend to come up. And there isn't any substitute for an authentic commitment to values. And as you think about your employer, I hope and pray that everybody on this call finds themselves with a company, with an organization that doesn't just have values, but adheres to those values and backs up their people every time that you do too. So these things all kind of tie together. But as you're looking at jobs, and I compliment all of you on the foresight to be born at times to enter the job market when it's historically strong. You chose your parents wisely and chose your timing wisely. So take advantage of it. There's a lot of jobs out there. Even if it's not the top dollar job, when you got student debt, that's easy to say. Don't worry so much about your starting salary. Worry more about your starting experience. It's the kind of company that's going to help you be a better professional. You'll make your money eventually. Maybe not the first year, maybe not the first 3 years, but you'll never be able to recover the early learning experience that you'll get from a really good company.
Great. Excellent advice. I just have to ask you a quick question, and it's kind of going along your international work. A number of attendees were asking about this. Allison wanted to know what struggles or setbacks did you experience with your expansion into Latin America? And we're down to about 5 minutes here left, Steve, so I just want to give you that heads up. But any challenges you're in Latin America?
It's a great question, and there's a lot of things you learn working internationally. First thing I learned was time zones, not Latin America, but going to Asia. It's 12 hours different, so if you're going to be useful to your team, you better be a night owl because they're going to need you when it's not convenient. But with Latin America specifically, there were a lot of challenges. The biggest one for me was overcoming a different perspective about workplace safety. And our headquarters for Latin America is in Mexico City, but we operate throughout the region. And we have for a number of years. And it actually started before I got here. We expanded, made a permanent office in 2003 and got serious about it. But there was a cultural difference about workplace safety and frankly about just maybe even the value of life in some ways. And I don't mean that those countries were disparate. In some ways, they have far better cultures than we do in the United States, but they didn't have a meaningful thing like OSHA. So they didn't have a regulatory framework that incented you to comply with safety. They didn't have a legal framework, so if you got sued because somebody got hurt, it wasn't very expensive. So there wasn't an economic reason to do it, nor was there sort of general expectations about safety. People took more risks. And that was hard to get my head around. So you say, well, now what are you going to do about it? And our conclusion as a company was, what we're not going to do is have different standards for safety depending on where we're at. A human life in Mexico or Nicaragua or in places is exactly the same value as it is here in Jacksonville, Florida, or in Boulder, Colorado. And so we challenged our safety. So we know this is harder. We know it may be impossible. We know that others don't think this way, but your job is to have the same safety standards that we employ here. No exceptions, no excuses. Just figure it out. And that's a really unfair thing to say, because I didn't tell them how, because I didn't know how. But we have today our safety record in our Latin American operations. We're a very safe firm. We're top tier percentage by anybody's judgment. You know, we have an accident rate that is 5% of what the industry average is. And our Latin American operations are better than our company average by a little bit, not by a lot. Somehow they figure out how to enforce this culture in a culture that doesn't, our safety culture, in a culture that doesn't necessarily support it the same way, and where competitors perhaps don't see it quite the same way. And I am overwhelmed with pride every time I visit that operation, because they just figure out how to do it 10 times harder than it is here, but they get results. And that was the hardest thing for me to get my arms around, but far harder for people that actually did the work and solved the issue and helped us keep our safety culture intact no matter where in the world we operate.
Great, that's excellent. As I said, a lot of our attendees are interested in the international aspects of your work as well. So thanks for sharing both those last answers. We are closing though, unfortunately. I'm really enjoying the time, but I'm going to ask you just one last question and let you close on this. Okay. And so Sarah is asking, what are you most proud of all your accomplishments?
Well, that presumes I've had many accomplishments at all. But you know, having just stepped down as CEO, it is kind of a time for reflection. And you can kind of point to things like growing the business or increased profitability. But that's not really it. What I feel best about is that we built a culture based on a set of values that I believe today are widely adhered to by people in this company. They look out for each other, they trust each other, they work with excellence, and they realize that this is a service business. And it's not perfect. At any given time, something's happened and you wish it wasn't. But in general, we've got great people that are bound together by a common set of values that inspire them to more than they would be. Great. And I feel good about that.
Well, outstanding. I think that's an excellent question to close on. Steve, thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your thoughts with us. I know I've really enjoyed it. I'm sure everyone else has as well. And thank you all for attending and staying online. I know you're all waiting for me to announce the scholarship winner as well. So Jesse Mallard from the University of North Carolina, congratulations. Yours have been randomly selected for the scholarship, and the National Academy of Construction will be in touch with you to distribute that scholarship. For the rest of you, please do join us again next month. We'll have Jan Tuckman with Engineering News Record is going to talk about her experience, and she just has a wonderful perspective on the industry given that her history with that publication. So in addition to thanking Steve and all of you, I would also like to thank Wayne Crew and all of the staff at the National Academy of Construction for supporting this, and also Jane Song here at the University of Colorado, who you've all been corresponding with and setting up this event. So with that, we'll bid you adieu, and thank you so much for attending tonight. And thanks again, Steve.
Keith, thank you very much. I'll see you later this week at the NAC meeting, I assume. And every single best wish to everybody on this call. I hope you have fantastic careers in this great profession that you've chosen.
Thanks.